Authors Press.
Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. And on the line with us today, we have James A. Fink. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, Tales of the Witch of Temeshvar, Pawn to Powers. If you guys want to get everything that James has to offer, do yourself a favor. Go directly to his personal website, talesofthewitchoftemeshvar.com. There, not only will you be able to purchase the book, but you'll also be able to gather more information on the book as well as more information on James himself. So one more time, that's talesofthewitchoftemeshvar.com. And I will say, James was brought to People of Distinction today by some of the best movers in the business, Authors Press Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, move it to Authors Press. You can find them at authorspress.com. And guys, listen, I am so excited to have James here on the line because his book we're going to be discussing today. It's a fictional narrative, right? But I'm really looking forward to it, A, because the underlying message and the underlying theme is something that is so universal. But also, what a great time to have a fictional narrative of this magnitude, a journey that we can take to really go outside of the four walls that have confined us for so long. And on this journey, that's exactly what we're going to find. Again, it's a fictional narrative. We're going to be following a female protagonist. So right off the bat, representation is fantastic. But also, it's such a great underlying message because at the end of the day, you may not be able to relate specifically to her struggles and the obstacles that she faces. But the way we connect it back to our everyday lives is, guys, it's all about perseverance, right? On life's journey, we're handed so many obstacles. We're handed so many challenges. And at the end of the day, it's all about buckling down and persevering. And I absolutely love that message. Definitely something that we can relate to. And I'm so glad that we have James here on the line because, listen, he's written the book. He's done the research. He's going to be able to articulate all the nuances in his book much better than I ever could. So without further ado, James, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
I'm not too bad. Thank you for having me on your program.
Absolutely. Well, James, listen, we're very much looking forward to this. Before we jump into the book, let's hold off slightly. Tell our listening audience a little bit more about yourself.
Well, I work for the City of New York in the Health and Hospitals Corporation in the payroll division for the last 31 years. I've recently retired. And before that, I worked as worked in a landscape gardening flower shop for about 13 or 14 years. So as you can tell, just between those two occupations, I've been around for a good long time. So now I'm retired from HHC, and I got a little time to do some writing.
Fantastic. Well, listen, it's always a pleasure to have a fellow East Coaster on the line with us. I'm from New England. You're from New York. We're pretty much neighbors. It's fantastic. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, but you guys are rooting for the wrong football team.
Well, first of all, I think New York has a bit of a conflict in and of itself. You guys have multiple football teams. Which one do you root for?
I root for the Giants.
Oh, the Giants.
And, of course, that's almost as bad as rooting for the Jets because, neither have been doing well of late.
Listen, we'll have a separate discussion off the line about this, James, because the Giants took 2 Super Bowl rings away from us, okay? Much earned, not taking anything away from you, but we lost 2 Super Bowl rings because of the Giants.
Yeah, well, hey, got to lose something sometime.
Absolutely. Really. Well, listen, Brady left us now, so we're definitely in the dark ages. We're gonna be probably a rough cut of what we used to be for quite some time, but we'll see.
Yeah, still got Belichick, and you still got a lot of talent up there, so I don't think you guys are gonna be down and out for very long.
I hope so. James, let's jump right in. Tales of the Witch of Temeshvar, Pawn to Powers. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, it's about this girl. She's in her mid-teens, around 15 years old. Unfortunately, it's set in 1698. Starts off with her stealing aboard a merchant ship to escape a brothel she owes money to because they posted her bond. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, by stealing onto that boat, she's a stowaway. She goes from being an escaped prostitute, or actually stripper for the brothel, to a stowaway, to getting tossed into a Alexandrian slave market. And from there, her life gets even worse. Okay, I won't go into too many more details, but let's just say that from the slave market, she winds up getting loaned to the slave market's friend for a couple of weeks, who then sells her to an African princess, and from there it's a journey south into darkest Africa and a very terrible life, or at least it looks like it to her at that point.
Wow. All right, so there's a lot going on. I mean, this is definitely a lengthy journey that we go upon with these characters. Now, James, next question, let's go into the title. Now, of course, the main title seems pretty straightforward. After hearing your synopsis, we understand the connection there. Now, even the subtitle, Pawn to Powers, I can assume after hearing your description what that means pertaining to the book, but without giving too much away, why did you choose that particular title to be the representation for your book?
Well, Tales of the Witch of Temeshvar, the overtitle, comes from the original town that the character comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And Pawn to Powers is, as you can tell, she is a pawn. She's become a pawn to various peoples and institutions. Her life is not her own anymore,
mm-hmm.
because she tried to escape first from her home city. She was being used by her uncle to secure his town's continued autonomy from the Ottomans. She didn't want to do that. Now she wound up in a brothel in Thessalonica in Greece, again, because she was subject to the whims of the gypsy band that she was traveling with, and because of that, she wound up doing a dance she shouldn't have, got arrested, and wound up in the brothel. This is all backstory. And then she escaped to the ship, and from there things just got worse. She's basically being pilloried from post to post. Her life is not her own, and she's trying to find some way to, again, make it her own. So until she can do that, she is a pawn to whoever holds her freedom in their hands. And right now, nobody wants to let her go free. She's much too useful to them.
Absolutely. Now let's go into the concept of inspiration. Now, of course, James, inspiration can take many forms, so it'll be a multi-part question. First part of it, have you always wanted to be a writer? You come from a background, of course, where you stated you worked for the city of New York for about 30 plus years. So this clearly wasn't something that you initially embarked upon as a career for yourself.
No.
So where did that inspiration come from?
Many years ago. Last millennium, as a matter of fact. Back when I was in elementary school. A friend of mine and his friend were monkeying around with a couple of hairy-looking critters, and I'm going, what's that? Oh, this is the rocks and the gravels. They're always having wars and always fighting. And that kind of piqued my interest. And then my brother and I, we started coming up with our own stories based off of what him and my friend and his friend were doing on a blackboard. And from there, quite a few years later, I wrote short stories for English class, which saved me from a bad grade a couple of times in high school. I took a couple of storytelling classes, creative writing classes in college. And when my nieces and nephews came along, I would tell them stories about dinosaurs. And then when I ran out of storylines for dinosaurs, I go, I got an idea. I got a story. I got an idea for, witches are big things right now. How about I tell you a story about this girl named Kate. Actual name is Katerina Mariska Calliope Elizabeth Strelchuk. That's the main character in the story. And that came up as the Witch of Temeshvar, and it was simplified stories for them, geared for their age range. And the current story is an evolution of those children's stories I told my nieces and nephews. So I mean, it's just an escalation of what I've been doing, either by word or by writing with my brother or my nieces and nephews, or just sitting down in the basement on a typewriter writing up stories.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing, James. Now, second part to that question, we know what inspired you to start embarking upon this journey. But of course, this is the main one. This is the first one that really sparks this, right? This is the one that's available for purchase as of right now. But as we know, and as we're about to tell our listening audience, this is a series, right? You're actually working on the fourth book in the series now. So what inspired you to not end there, but then to continue on and focus on developing this protagonist further?
Well, the first story originally started off as a series of 5 short stories. But I'm looking at this and I'm like, this could actually become a regular, single volume. And so I went in and I combined the 5 stories together, did a lot of editing. And in the process of editing, I came to the end of the story. I'm like, okay, how do I end this? And no, I don't want to end it where she's stuck here. So I had to come up with something that would allow me to continue the story. And the second story, which has not been published as yet, led into a third story. Now the third story wound up with her already stuck in Central Africa. So I'm giving you a preview of where she is. And she winds up, basically learning. Well, we'll not go there because that's not really going to help with the audience. It'll just frustrate them. But but it just didn't seem like there was a proper way to end the first story and be done with the character. And there still doesn't seem to be a legitimate way to end the story with this character, because it just as I write, there are more things that occur, more characters get pulled in, different circumstances, and her character evolves, and her interests evolve, and the situations she gets involved with evolve. So it just doesn't seem like there's a good place to end the story. I have ending in sight for her where I know I want to take her, but that's not for quite a while to come. If you got a interesting character, you may start off writing the character in the first story, maybe even the second story, but somewhere around the third or fourth story, the character starts telling you what the story needs to be. You might be able to set the general parameters at the beginning of the story, but after that, this character and the characters that you have surrounded her, him, it, or whatever with, they begin telling you how that story is going to have to go. And unless they're tired of that story, of their life, of where they want to go, you just have to follow. You just have to continue to tell the story.
Being an artist myself, I can completely attest and I can completely relate to what you're saying, because a lot of times, again, that's why the closest thing I can relate it to is passion. When you're engulfed in something, you're passionate about something, again, these ideas will just continue to come. They'll continue to develop. You're an artist. This is a creation of yours. So, of course, because you're so engulfed in it, all these ideas continue to come. It continues to grow and develop. It's like that initial spark that started, as you said, with your nieces and nephews. as just a snowflake has now accumulated into this snowball, and it just continues to roll down that hill and get bigger and bigger. Yeah. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, if I'm lucky, it won't become an avalanche and consume me.
There it is. Guys, again, here on the line with James A. Fink. We're discussing his fantastic book, Tales of the Witch of Temeshvar, Pawn to Powers, available through his personal website, talesofthewitchoftemeshvar.com. Now, James, next question that I'd love to go into. Thank you so much for everything that you've relayed thus far. I'm curious, okay, what would you say was a highlight for you in writing this book? Or if not a highlight, maybe something that surprised you that you weren't expecting prior to embarking upon this journey?
The ending of the first book surprised me. I knew generally how I wanted the book to end, but the actual end, how it worked out, that kind of surprised me. I'm not going to say any more on that, but it was aiming in that general direction, but the specifics is how to accomplish the ending, that came as a bit of a surprise.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Listen, leave more to the imagination. Guys, you know what you got to do. You want to figure out that ending? There's no getting around it. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or his personal website. That's the only way to get all of the answers. James, as we start to tie up this fantastic interview, last question as we step away from the book. Listen, we've heard about everything, what inspired you, the entire journey. We know everything about the book. Now, you are a published author, right? This is something that you've been working on now for years. It's something you've always had a passion for. You finally published this book, and it's the first of a series of books to be published. Question for you. I love, as I stated to you before, because I'm an artist, I love having this platform to be able to pay it forward to other artists out there. Any words of wisdom, any advice that you can give our listening audience, any new writer that's out there listening in right now, what are some words of wisdom that you can relay to them, James?
Really very simple. Writing is hard. It really is. It's like writing is a job. Anything you are going to do, preferably if you want to do it well, requires a lot of work and repetition. And look, this book got published last year. I have been writing stories and telling stories since I was 9 years old. And I've been writing stories since I was 14. And the first story I ever wrote was one page, and I thought, how the hell am I going to finish this? I don't know how I'm going to write a whole page story. And now here I am. I'm published. The book itself is 486 pages. The manuscript prior to publication was over 360 pages. So it's a matter of work and diligence. You have to do some research if you want to set your characters in a distant place, a distant planet, a different continent, a different time. But if you just want to just establish them in the general milieu of the time and then ignore everything else, you could do that too. But you still need some grounding for the time period. You have to understand what are the constraints. Were there guns? Were there bows and arrows? How did people dress generally? And if you want to make sure that your main character is always clothing challenged, you could do that too. But understand, you have to understand that there may be limits to where that could be done. But it's work. It's a hard job in order to write the story, write the article, write the book. After that, it gets even more difficult and occasionally seriously frustrating to get it published. But if you're going to do the job, if you're going to be an author, or if you're going to be a storyteller, a playwright, it's work. Don't go into it thinking, oh, I can write anything. No, you can't. You have to know what you want to write. You have to know who you want to write for. Whether it's for yourself or an outside audience, you still have to know who do you want to write for first and what subject you want to address. If you don't know that, don't bother picking up the pen, don't bother picking up the pencil, Don't bother hitting the keyboard on your typewriter or your computer or your tablet, because you're not going to be successful even for your own personal edification and gratification. Think, research, plan, plot, organize, and understand you may never get published, but if you enjoy telling stories, that's the way to go.
There you have it. I absolutely love the advice that you gave, because really it's something that can be applied to anybody, not just an artist. And that is the reason why I think it's so profound. No matter what it is that you're doing, no matter what it is that you're dedicated to, practice makes perfect. I know it's one of the oldest cliches in the book, but it reigns true.
I never had writer's block, but you know how you solve writer's block?
How is that?
Have a good plan of attack. Have a good plan of attack on your story. Give yourself a general outline. Know how you want to end the story. It's like writing a computer program. You got to know what the results are going to look like before you begin writing the first line of code. Same thing with a book. Know what your ending is going to look like before you write that first word.
Absolutely. Guys, listen, what more can be said? You know what you got to do. Head on over to his personal website, talesofthewitchoftemeshvar.com, and pick up your copy. You surely will not be disappointed. James, thank you so much once again for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Thank you for having me, and let us hope everything works out well for you and your patriots.